Take my glasses off.
Yeah, so let me give you a little context of how we came to be so far. We started meeting once the pandemic came about. Instead of in person, we started to meet weekly as an orchestra online, and then we started to have discussion about what it means to be an orchestra, what qualities make a good orchestra, a great orchestra. So we students and I started talking about the ability to listen to each other, being empathetic to your members of your community, and then as we continue to meet over the summer to welcome in new freshmen and new members to the orchestra, we were continuing to have this conversation. And at that point, we weren't really sure whether we'll be able to meet in person in the fall semester. But then the whole Black Lives Movement exploded. And for a while, students for Cornell-wide were very unhappy with how Cornell was responding, lack thereof, actually. And so there's a meme sort of running during the summer. It was called #CornellDoBetter. So our students were demanding of the university, but also they wanted to craft a Black Lives Matter statement. So I said, that's great, but I nudged them a little further. If we're gonna make a statement, then I'm not interested in having an empty statement that doesn't really make any difference of how we program, what repertoire we program, how we recruit members for our orchestra, how we engage with our larger community. So we started to continue this conversation. And so the students and I drafted a Black Lives Matter statement, and I'll share that with you so you can see what their thought process is right now. Let me go to the browser. And I'll send you links to all of these. So we drafted a statement, and then I got in touch with Daniel Barnard-Romain, who I went to Michigan with, and then with Aaron Dworkin, who's also, I've known him when he was a violin major in Michigan, and just starting this idea of Sphinx. And I watched him sort of grow this thing into a worldwide phenomenon. So I sort of put our heads together, and we talked about how we could have this conversation with the orchestra. So in the beginning, in the summer, I was thinking of it just as, I'll have Daniel and Aaron, and maybe all these other people from the profession talking about orchestra in general. But the more and more we start to talk about this issue of racism in orchestra, and I was a little bit hesitant to sort of dive into this topic myself because I sort of felt really underqualified, and I don't have the experiences to be the person leading the charge to have this conversation with my students. But I realized that my ignorance, my lack of knowledge, my lack of experience is no excuse to sort of step back and not do anything. And so as I watched Daniel and Aaron have these conversations in many different settings, including the League of American Orchestras, and so we sort of decided to go all in. And I said, you know what, let's have 12 speakers, and each person is going to be tackling this issue. And it's not that we're going to somehow come up with a magic solution. That's not the, but it's to open the door of awareness for our students who are not going to be professional musicians. They're mostly non-music major in our orchestra, but they are the students who will graduate Cornell, and then they will become an arts supporter in their city. They will be the ones to buy tickets to our orchestra concert. They may in fact be the future orchestra board members who may be dealing with a situation where the rest of the board and the orchestra and the conductor wants to be status quo and not change things and just do the Beethoven, Brahms programming and stay safe. But I want our students to be the instigators of change, because it's going to take probably a long time before we see real significant change in our industry. So far we've had two speakers. We had Daniel Bernard Romain as our first speaker, and after the 90-minute session, he commented to me that during the summer when he was speaking to orchestra boards and League of American sort of webinar settings, or Hartford, or in all these different settings, he felt like there was about halfway point until which he was feeling the pushback, right? So it wasn't sort of, in some places, outwardly hostile sort of questions and statements, and then but there was a sort of a breaking point at which the tides turned, and then Daniel really felt like, the Cornell students, they were all ready for this. So he really felt that the conversation had been going on, and that they are already aware of the inequities in many different levels of our society, not just orchestra, and not just university-wide, not just education, but just a whole many different ways. So in a way, that it was a 90-minute of sort of a fiery, let's make the change. And then afterwards, the students sort of felt like, great, but how do we do this? Like, it's just such a massive undertaking. What would my little pitty sort of effort, how would it make any difference, right? So then the students felt a little bit like lost in terms of, oh, the problem is so massive. So I'm actually glad that some of them got to that place where they realized that the problem is so massive, right? And then Rachel Barton-Pine, who was a guest yesterday, she focused in on her work for the last 2 decades, trying to work with many different people. And she kept continuing to say, I'm not the brain power, I'm not the person who is largely responsible. And in fact, she at multiple times said, it was never my intention to be a social justice sort of fighter. I just kind of fell into this because I played a few pieces early in my career. My first recording was she wasn't famous enough to record a Brahms violin concerto. So the record company said, well, why don't you record something obscure? So being a music geek that she is, she went and found all these composers who happened to be Black. And so she's been doing this amazing work with her foundation, as you know, because you're on that board. And so that's where the students are right now. And so what I'm doing each week before each of the speakers is that I'm sending them links for whether it be a video or article or a chapter of a book for them to read and respond to. And each speaker has a sort of a discussion module where they're asking questions, they're talking about ideas that are triggered by the article or the video that's been sent to them in advance. So what I've sent to them, what I put up in the module, let me show you the module that I have. Where'd it go? I have to go to my browser. Okay, so so in the discussion section, you have a module for your appearance, and I put your bio on your website, the composer portrait, that's a fairly short intro for the American Composers Orchestra, and then the Beethoven Now series with Philly, which is also short. And then basically six recordings, so that what I want them to really have a picture of who you are as a composer, and so that's what they've been exposed to so far, right? And so I'm hoping that our conversation today will give them a few more tidbits to think about, so that they're ready to really engage with you with questions and conversation about this topic. Um,
Cool. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a nutshell. I mean, I really honor and I appreciate what you're doing, and this is a well-needed conversation, and using this platform, to really bring awareness. And
Mhm.
I'm just grateful to be a part of the conversation. So I thank you for the invitation.
Oh, I mean, I'm so grateful for all you and all of our speakers because everybody's so busy. And I find, I was talking to Rachel's agent today, and uh, that Rachel and Jesse Montgomery and Anthony McGill, who's all three of our will be appearing on the series. They've been getting so busy advocating on this issue, um, and I think we're in this weird. Maybe because of the pandemic, maybe because of all of the things that happened this summer with the protests and but I think there's a bigger, um, not only awareness, but uh, I think desires are too strong of a word, but um, um, there are many who are saying it's no longer acceptable just to sit on the sidelines and uh, let the status quo be. It's not okay to say it's okay for the status quo to continue.
Yeah, sure. I heard a colleague of mine, Joseph Conyers, bassist for Philadelphia Orchestra. He described this time in our society as a wormhole, like a
Mm-hmm.
time warp, where it's this thing where people are finally paying attention to something that has been going on for years and decades, and it has just become, I guess, not only a national phenomenon but an international phenomenon. People
Mm-hmm.
all over the world know about what's happening in this country, and I think now some time to get as much work as we can done. And I feel like in this time warp, hopefully it doesn't end soon, but like
Right, right.
it's it's a great time.
Yeah.
So I'm just happy to be a part of the conversation. I'm sort of like Rachel. Like I didn't, plan to kind of be a part of it. And I'm naturally not a speaker when it comes to issues. But I say what I feel, what have I experienced, and it's I try to speak my truth. And it's one of these things where I feel it's an obligation of mine to speak for those who come after me,
Mm-hmm.
and because I know that people, composers who came before me, they did legwork just as much or more legwork
Mm-hmm.
than I could ever imagine. I mean, even behind the scenes,
Mm-hmm.
and so now we have the platform to where people are listening. It would be an injustice for me not to do my part, and however, whether through my music or just speaking or there's so many ways. But for me right now, it's either just saying what I can say and
Mm-hmm.
saying what I can say through my music.
Yeah.
So those are my two ways right now,
Yeah.
of sort of speaking on the issue. I do some in my teaching as well. I teach music theory and composition at Georgetown University. And, in my examples that I play in my theory class, for instance, I'm not just bringing in Mozart and Beethoven,
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing in, uh, you know, Big Mama Thornton, and
Yeah.
I'm bringing in those prison ring shouts, and but they do just as much. They're just as effective, and bring
Yeah.
in and talking about the concept.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a holistic approach, and the students seem to enjoy it, rather than just be bringing in Bach,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
it's I think it's a holistic thing, and then I try my best to um, use all of my platforms to show some equity
Mm-hmm.
and equality, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Uh, can you talk to us uh, about your how you got turned into a composer in your training and your upbringing, and how that was, uh, you know, I think because I only have my own perspective, right? Because as an Asian person going through the School of Music Conservatory system, you know, I saw a counterpart of me everywhere, right? So it wasn't really unusual for me to think, oh yeah, music is something I would go into. Although I did have pushback from my father, who was very traditional Korean, and he thought, you know, men should not go into music. So he had that, still had that old idea. So he was against me going into music. But in terms of having a role model or having seeing another Asian person in the profession, you know, I wasn't the only one. So I had sort of role models to see and follow. Uh, but you know, I certainly faced my share of incidences where you know, where it was clear the message was I'm not German, so how could I possibly be able to interpret you know, Beethoven? So I got that. I got that in conducting master classes and things like that. But what kinds of encounters did you have through your education and your training?
Yeah, well, I didn't start reading music and until, you know, well into high school. You know, I was maybe a junior or senior in high school, but before then, you know, I would learn music by ear. You know, I have the oral tradition in my family. My family is very musical, but none of them read music. You know,
Mm.
it's you just sit down at the piano and you just figure it out. You know, it's amazing to me that, you know, they have been my uncles and aunts. They're so talented. You know,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
have great ears. And so I followed that tradition. You know, I just knew that was the way. And like it was just like natural. It felt natural to me. Um, Now, you know, I'll never forget this. You know, I didn't grow up listening to Beethoven or Mozart. You know, it was gospel music. It was,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, we couldn't listen to R&B or hip hop. It was only gospel music.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I my grandmother, she gave me a CD when she learned that I wanted to like read music and like learn how to play like from the greats. She got me a CD of classical masterpieces, and you know, on that CD was Beethoven 7 and Beethoven Pathetique, and it just blew my mind. Like, wow, it was amazing. And I just like I took the CD and I tried to imitate what was happening. And Beethoven Pathetique, that beginning, dun, da, dun, da, dun, dun.
Yeah.
And I mean, I did the best I could with the knowledge that I had, but um, it just it immersed me into a world that I never knew existed really,
Mm-hmm.
through my education, undergraduate, it became clear to me that this world that I love so much wasn't made for me. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it was a predominantly white space, you know, and that sort of made me feel like an outsider, you know,
Mm.
like, and it didn't hinder my love for it because I just love the harmonic language of Beethoven and Bach, and
Mm-hmm.
it just did something to me. And you
Mm-hmm.
know, when I would started learning this stuff, the repertoire, I would go and play it for my family, and they just thought the world of me. They thought I was just more like highfalutin now, you know, just in the oh you big time now, you know. And so, you know, we can also talk about the chasm that kind of goes between like if I'm playing this classical music that it's like sort of elite music, and then
Mm-hmm.
bring it into this world where it's not oral tradition, you know, what does that do for me? It's like I'm
Right.
in between these worlds, and so
Yeah.
like I'm having to like juggle and make it seem like I'm not like too high and mighty, or and then
Mm-hmm.
on this side it's like, okay, you know, I'm a part of this world, but you know, it's weird sort of position to be in. But
Yeah.
um, you know, through my career and through my graduate studies, I always felt like an outsider. But one thing that has grounded me is, my musical beginnings and
Mm-hmm.
understanding how rich and how amazing Black culture is and how much it
Mm-hmm.
has done for American culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like realizing that in classes,
Yeah.
and talking about how Motown and Aretha Franklin and Marvin
Yeah.
Gaye and even as far as Pharrell Williams and I'm learning about Alvin Singleton and
Mm-hmm.
William Frank Steele and Margaret Barnes and that having those names and knowing what their work was and knowing where they came from, more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, and how similar it was to my beginnings, it really helped me to understand I'm not alone. I'm not the first one to do this,
Mm-hmm.
and so I shouldn't feel like I'm alone. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it felt very comforting to learn about these artists who've come before me and to really understand where I fit,
Mm. Yeah.
and it's like a respect, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna I'll do my best. I'll do my best because realizing that I'm a part of this lineage, and if I mess it up,
Right.
then it's like
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
messes up for someone behind me.
Yeah.
So I have to do my best in every aspect. So a long-winded answer to say it's important for me to what grounds me is that cultural background for
Mm-hmm.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Never forgetting
Yeah.
that.
I absolutely agree. For me, I was lucky to have Gunther Schuller as one of my mentors, who, uh, most people know him as a composer, conductor, horn player in the Metropolitan Orchestra as a 17-year-old. But his work in the jazz world is tremendous, right? So that he knew jazz musicians intimately. And he constantly talked about in teaching compositional skills that there was no equal to Duke Ellington, right? The way he used orchestral colors with his men in his band, and how through the orchestral works. So I was lucky to have a mentor who valued not just sort of the Western canon of the German canon, but one of my mentors always talked about the importance of Duke Ellington in American music, and that should affect all of us as musicians who grew up in America. Yeah, yeah. Um, so one of the things that came up after Daniel's appearance with our students is this. So on one hand, they felt energized and ready to do something, but on the other hand, they felt this overwhelming, massive inequity structure that is not equitable. So, what are some things that our Cornell students can do today, tomorrow, in a month, within this year, that will go towards making a difference? And some of them are going to be mentors to these fourth grade children in the city of Ithaca. And many of them from lower economic backgrounds. So we're partnering with a local school, and the music teacher said, the biggest needs isn't doing a side by side or doing a one-off young people's concert as a run out, but actually some of our students, they can't afford lessons, and they end up quitting after fourth grade or fifth grade year, after a year or two on an instrument, because they see those students who are able to afford lessons and those students who have been playing in a Suzuki program since they were 5 progress towards the front of the orchestra, right? They're all sitting in concertmaster principals. And then the ones who can't afford lessons sort of fall behind. And by the end of the year, you know what, I'm not that good anyway, so I'm going to quit. So we've been having this many years of partnership, mentoring young students. And that's been a really positive experience for our students as well. They all came into it thinking it's going to be, I'm just going to be serving. But in fact, they got so much out of that experience. Kirkland, who's one of my bass players, he's had the same bass player kid for 3 years, and he's basically been adopted by the family. And he really feels like he has a second family that he can rely on. when he's not home and here on Cornell campus. But back to, sorry, I tend to talk too much. But what are some suggestions you have for our students embarking on this journey of trying to make a difference? What can they do?
Well, I mean, I think you said it, the first thing is really awareness of, and being truly aware and cognizant of the unfairness and how systematic it is. I, I see it now more than ever, especially in the classroom.
Yeah.
Before coming to Georgetown, I had taught at an HBCU, historically Black college, and I came in with it as an invested interest because I'm a product of HBCU. I went to Morehouse College and grew up in Atlanta, which has sort of been the hub for, especially for civil rights, and I grew up hearing about Dr. King and all the others, Joseph Lowery and C.T. Vivian, and so it's very much part of my heritage. And I in my teaching, I came in with it like, it's sort of every student is a mentor, and I have to do as much as I can for that student. And now that I'm at Georgetown, I see just how, most of my students it's a predominantly white institution. And so, I just see how much preparation they've had in comparison to my Black students who are at Spelman College where I work. And how just like, it's just a different world altogether. And like, I realize how the inequity there. So that's the first step, honestly. And realizing that in your own world, whether it be in business or in finance or government, policy, political science, you have to apply that awareness in your whatever field you're in, and just be, gosh, sympathetic, and that means the world, and then having an understanding that everyone didn't have the same opportunities. That is so important, and if you just come in with that, but not being patronizing, of course, but I think it's important for us to be sympathetic humans, and realizing your privilege, and using that privilege to lift someone else up who's not as fortunate. You got to be able to give it up. That's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to do. And so that's just an overall thing. Of course, you can apply that in whatever field.
Aaron posted on Facebook I think it was a Procter & Gamble ad called The Look, right? And so it's a really powerful ad where an African American man walks through the neighborhood, walks through the diner, and all these people non-verbally just kind of look at him, right? He's dropping off his kid at school and he's got a hoodie on, and they look at him, right? It's sort of that uncomfortable look. They're not saying anything, right? But it's that look. And so the final scene is, it opens into a courtroom, and everybody stands up, right? And so, the flip is, instead of the Black man being on trial, it's the Black man is the judge, right? And he sits down, and everybody sits down. And so, I remember being the first, one of 3 Korean Americans when at my first job in Quincy, Illinois, which was a town of 40,000, surrounded by 50 miles of corn. And I would go to the mall, and these 7-year-olds would look at me sort of with their mouth open because they'd never seen an Asian person before, right? And it's this, and I think sometimes many of us who that we make a mistake of looking at somebody that's different, right? And rather than looking at that person with empathy, looking at that person as another human being, immediately our defenses are up. Immediately we look at them, think of them as, oh, here's a strange person. What is that person doing here, right? So, but even that kind of sentiment, because we have so many inequities in our society, redlining, and people are just not used to living, unless they live in a big city like New York or Atlanta, where it's just normal to be all together, right? But that's actually not the case in many cities. Even in the city of Ithaca, which is supposed to be a progressive town, right? There are 5 neighborhood elementary schools, and they're very, very different. And the districting of those elementary school is not a logical geographical 5 division of the Ithaca area. It's these really weird spiderwebs things to put together all the students into Beverly J. Martin, which is the most diverse and the most African-American students in that school. And then there's another school in Caroline, which is completely white. There's another school, Bell Sherman, which is largely white. But there's a big Tibetan student population because there's a Tibetan community there near there. And then Northeast, which is like half Asian. So even in a town that's supposed to be progressive, that history of segregation within the Ithaca city still remains in terms of how the elementary schools are formed, right? And I've seen that countless times in many places I've taught. Quincy, the first place I taught after college, it's right on the Quincy is right on the river by the Missouri border. And, Missouri was a slave state, and then Illinois was a free state. So Quincy was actually the first stop on the Underground Railroad. So because of that, there is, unlike many other Midwestern cities, it has a large African-American population, right? But as a result, you have 5 neighborhood schools, 2 are Black and 3 are white, right? And so I taught 4th grade through 12th grade music, where they have a elementary school, grade 4, 5, 6, where for the first time, all these kids who had been separated for the first time in the same place, in the same building. But you would think that they're all together. No, still they're not together, because they would have the accelerated classes, which are white, and sort of the regular classes, which are kind of more mixed, and then remedial classes, which are Black. I mean, it was so clear as night and day how they were separating based on race. I was like, this is wrong, right? Yeah.
I remember growing up in Atlanta. I was supposed to go. I didn't go to the school in my jurisdiction, because I wanted to go. My mom wanted me to go to a performing arts school, and that's where I learned how to read music. But she wanted performing arts for me, and so I had to go. I drive maybe 20, 30 minutes outside of my jurisdiction to go to the performing arts high school.
Yeah.
And so like it's one of these things, in the black communities, sometimes they're kind of, you don't really see performing arts and they're scattered about, and you would think it would be more programs in STEM and performing arts and that sort of thing, but I'm glad that I went to the performing arts school, because it really helped me to kind of be prepared for undergraduate and graduate, and I don't think I would have been as prepared if I had gone to the school in my jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So and I just think like how many students who have like amazing talent, whether it be singing and performing, and they just don't have the the resources, the teachers, the schools to see that and to really develop that, and I consider myself fortunate because I had great teachers and great mentors, and I still do. And it's really honestly, I can't explain it. I'm so grateful,
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing about my path. And if it wasn't for the mentors that I met, I don't think I would be here today, right? And so I'm really thankful for my teachers and mentors that I met on the way, for whom, race was not an issue, right?
Yeah.
And so somehow I was lucky enough to land in a place where I had mentors for whom what we brought, our work ethic, in terms of that was what mattered, not the color of our skin.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My favorite teachers, Evan Chambers at University of Michigan. He's my heart. I love
Oh, Wolverines.
yeah, go Blue.
Yeah, I don't know if you know, but I also went to did my master's at Michigan, and Michigan was for me a magical place because I had just finished working in public schools for 2 years, and I came to Michigan, and I absolutely made the right choice of not going straight on from my undergraduate degree because I took 2 years to work. I was actually like really thankful for my master's experience, and I think I saw other students who kind of came straight from their undergraduate program without working, and they were also so burned out of being in school. They're like they just want to be out of school. Where I was like, no, don't you realize how lucky you are?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was the same way, Chris. I was the same way.
Yeah.
I took 2 years between master's and doctorate, and that was those 2 years was some of the best years ever. Because I got to see the world and make money, and just to kind of really realize. And then when I went to my doctorate, it was like, this is heaven. This is an oasis. Especially in a place like University of Michigan, and the resources were there, and I could really do whatever I want, and dream however big I wanted, to write whatever I wanted, be around great people. That's something great, being around a good educational system, and just having the resources available, and more importantly, having the right type of people around you. Who are, talented and smart and go-getters, and having like-minded people. I think that's another thing that happens in Black communities. You become what you see. And what you see around you is not. It's not progressive or forward thinking, and you're just happy to get by. That's all you're gonna live up to, and I see that in a lot of Black communities, and especially in the community that I came from. I was just very fortunate again to have parents who sort of pushed me. And so going to Michigan, it was just like an extension of that, and it's like, wow, this feels amazing. And a lot of my friends now from Michigan, they are doing amazing things, and we just walk the stair step, together, and go higher and higher with each other. And I'm sure it's the same thing with you, and will be the same thing with your students at Cornell.
Once I read a really scary statistics that most Americans live within 10 miles of where they were born, right? So I think this, we really have to be, in order to be empathetic of another point of view, right? I think we have to be both a traveler in our, physically, but also in our minds, right? We have to be well read. We have to be exposed to many different viewpoints. And I think education is really the best way to allow people to see another point of view, right? And so I'm really hoping that this series of engagement with our speakers, with you, for our students, is a way for them to look at how they have been living in a particular set of environments, right? But that other people have different environments, and to be able to see another person's viewpoint is so important to understanding that perspective, right? Yeah.
Exactly right. So true.
All right. Well, so I'm really thankful for your willingness to take part in this, and I'm really looking forward to your appearance with our students, and really looking forward to it.